Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever and wherever you are. On this week's episode of Greetings From, we discuss a game from 2015, The Order 1886. We take a deep dive and discuss the strengths and weaknesses, the controversy surrounding it, and the many development challenges it faced. This episode is very old, from a time when we were still figuring out what this podcast should be. This is what we call our third Lost episode from December 2017. We do spoil The Order 1886 entirely, so if you haven't played the game and don't want it to be spoiled, skip this episode entirely. Otherwise, we'll see you next time in the present. Enjoy!
Greetings from Whitechapel, travelers. It is December of 2017, as far as you know, and today we'll be exploring The Order 1886. So my name is Rebecca. I'll be your host today. I almost forgot that I had introduced myself on this podcast of ours. I'm joined by Olivia.
Hi.
And Tyler.
What's up?
So I am glad I could gather you all here today to talk about a game that I love dearly, even though it's a hot piece of garbage. And that's The Order 1886. So The Order 1886, I believe, was meant to be a launch title for the PlayStation 4. Back when that released in, what was it, 2014? Is that when?
So long ago.
2014, I know. So it was meant to be a launch title. It got pushed back. There were some interesting kind of development hell things that happened. One thing I think is interesting about playing this game is we also played No Man's Sky. And both No Man's Sky and The Order were Sony first parties. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see kind of what happened there where, you know, No Man's Sky also didn't quite deliver what it was promised. And, you know, I don't know if Hello Games can salvage its reputation. It's kind of stuck just continually fixing this game and trying to iterate on it and hit the promises that it said it was going to hit. But then at the same time, Sony did not drop them as a first party. Like, Sony is still supposedly backing it, right? Yeah. Ready at Dawn got dropped by Sony. They own the Order IP, so if there was ever to be another game in the Order series, it would not be done by Ready at Dawn. However, because Ready at Dawn got dropped, they are still making games. They made Deformers, which was kind of a weird platformer type, like, fighting game. I don't know. And now, most recently, they've done Lone Echo, which I heard was really good for the for VR. I think it's on PlayStation VR and
Is that the
Vive or Oculus? You're in space. You're in space.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, is that the Echo game where you're like blind and you can only see the surrounding with the echolocation?
No.
Okay.
That one's just called Echo.
Okay. Sorry. Different game. But anyway.
There's too many games with the same names.
Do they also do Echo Arena? Is that part of this?
Yeah, so Echo Arena is the like multiplayer component to Lone Echo, so it's like zero gravity basketball played in VR.
It's like Ender's Game, kind of, right? That's kind of like
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where Ready at Dawn is now. This is where they're coming from. So the Order has a dear place in my heart because I believed in it. Like, I believed in what I thought it was and what it could do. I think playing it now, several years later, this came out in February of 2015. I don't know. I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts. Like, you know, I'm wondering, this was your first time playing it, right? Across the board?
It was for me.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's my first time finishing it. I did play it when it had initially released for like 30 minutes, and then I dropped the game.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was wondering, I was wondering if I was missing context for this game. Is there extra material that was released along with it that maybe I didn't see? Like, is there like a comic or something that went with it?
So they're not, as far as I'm aware. When the game released, it released in a regular, like a general format, and then it released in a special edition, which came with a Blackwater vial, and like I have it. I should have taken pictures so you guys could have seen it, but it's like a big statue of Galahad shooting at a lichen, like it's this huge ugly thing. And then after the game was released, the Blackwater Archives came out, which is like a 350-page art book / sort of treatise on what the game was, what they were trying to do with it, that kind of a thing. That's it. It was clear that they were setting it up to be a series, and then obviously that didn't happen and maybe will never happen.
Right.
So I think there's definitely, if you feel like you're missing context, I think it's because there just isn't any, which is unfortunate. Tyler, I'm curious to hear your opinion. So you said you played it for 30 minutes and then dropped it.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. Why did you drop it? Was it not hooking you? Did you just not have time?
So let's see here. This is a long time ago. When it initially came out, I think my roommate at the time, he like rented it from Redbox or something. I don't remember exactly, but it was a rental. He didn't actually own it. He's like, I heard about this game. I'm just gonna get it. I'm gonna rent it. So he did. But he didn't play it. I ended up playing it, and it was very slow at first. I only played it for like 30 minutes. Like I went through the initial part where you're with was it Sir Galahad, and you just kind of go through his opening story, and I basically got to the part where you meet Lady Igraine, and like after that, like I don't know why I dropped it. Previously or prior to it being released, I had seen it at PAX. I think it was 2014, and I played a demo there. And unfortunately, that demo wasn't that great. Unfortunately, reason being because the game itself is very cutscene. It has a lot of very seamlessly integrates cutscenes into gameplay, so it's a little confusing to know where it's is this a cutscene or am I able to now play? Do I have control of the character? So you're kind of throttling the controls to see if you're able to move yet, or if it's still a movie. And then anyway, the demo itself pretty much was 5 minutes of gameplay. I had waited like 3 hours in this line to play this demo, and it was like 5 minutes of cutscene, 5 minutes of gameplay, and like another 10 minutes of cutscene, and that was it. So that wasn't a great experience for me personally, because it was just like I waited 3 hours in line for this short of a demo that's kind of like bullshit. Not to say, like, I know it's awful things to say, but like that was my initial impression of this game. And then when it was released in 2015, I started playing it, and the beginning of the game did not grip me, and I was very like, when I played it, it had again the this is a cutscene, this isn't a cutscene, and I was just like, this entire game is going to be this way. I just don't want to play it. Having played it now all the way through, I am very disappointed in my past self, because it definitely like it has its problems, but this game has so much potential. I'm super sad that it received the reviews and ratings that it did. And I'm a little disheartened that it couldn't have been the game that the studio wanted it to be, or even that Sony wanted it to be. I feel like this game, at this time that this game came out, I feel like it was PlayStation or Sony's answer to Microsoft's Rise game, which was, I feel like it's almost the same thing. The Roman game that came out for the Xbox One, excuse me, when they released that.
So I'm glad we're already on the Xbox 3.
Right.
You're living in 3018
say Xbox
right now.
360,
I love
but
it.
anyway, I'm from the future. Can't tell you. That's the Xbox One 3X, whatever the fuck, because that's gonna be absurd.
Oh right.
Anyway, the Rise was basically to showcase how the Xbox One, their graphics and everything, and it was very like very movie the game, where it was a cutscene and then you had gameplay. And so Sony, I feel like had the order to showcase PS4's graphics and integration of cutscenes into gameplay. So that's my like first hands-on of the game.
I think that's an interesting point that I definitely want to just touch on a little bit here before we really get deep into the story. In the Blackwater Archives, which is the art book, the developers describe the Order as being a neo-Victorian Blade Runner. They talk about how they patterned Galahad a lot after Deckard, and how they had tried to kind of draw on the whole like Tears in the Rain sequence for Alistair's kind of final monologue.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, in terms of these sort of photorealistic games, these sort of movie-based games, um, do these kinds of games, do you feel like, and maybe Olivia, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you feel like these have a place in the lexicon? Like, do you feel like games are doing this kind of a thing better now than they have in the past? Is it something that's even worth
Yeah,
doing?
I definitely think that there is a place for games that are like narrative based, that try to tell a story, and like I don't know if the Order succeeds at that, but I think even in our previous, when we talked about Until Dawn, and like how they use like real player scan, like real actor scans to fit into this world, and like there is a, it's a very limited motion game. Like you're not doing a lot in there except for holding a controller, as still as possible in some scenes. I think there are. I agree with Tyler. Like the Rise has, like I could see the parallels between that and between Until Dawn. I have some issues, I think, with the storytelling inside of the Order, especially with comparisons to Blade Runner, because I feel like Blade Runner, like that story is painted through like, hey, here's this imagery throughout the world, here's like this oppressive kind of, whole dystopia that you're living in. And I think there are parallels in the Order where they try to like evoke that, but it just seemed like that final scene to me seemed a little like simplistic. Like it's kind of like taking that Tears in the Rain scene and removing all context from it and just being like, oh shit, he's a vampire, he's a werewolf, we have to kill him. Like that was the thought process that was happening from like, does this really matter? Like, or what is the context here? And like, it seems like Galahad should be super pissed at the guy who like has betrayed the Order and like had this whole fucked up plan. And I guess I was just confused, and maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to the story, but I feel like I tried to keep up with it. I didn't find all the secrets in the game. But it seemed like there was bits and pieces in the story that maybe weren't cohesive. And the question I kept asking myself was, how did this get made? And like, not in a bad way, but in terms of like, what were the production issues that happened? And like, who signed this talent before there was a, maybe a cohesive plotline? Or like, what were the cuts that were made? Because I feel like this was probably like butchered together from like several different game iterations. And this is the final product that was like put through the ringer in terms of like the development hell, like you were talking about. Does that match with your experience?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have tried even in the years since to do digging on like what happened. Because I know I'm gonna reference the frickin' art book like a million times, but it's clear reading those pages that this was something that the team really believed in, that this was a real visionary kind of product they had in their minds. And it's not clear where that all fell apart. And the studio's been really mum about what happened with Sony. It seemed like they got kind of rushed out the door. And it was just kind of like, this is sort of all we have, and we're just going to put it out there. Because it's even really disjointed based on, like, I don't know if you guys remember, I want to say it was like E3 2014, maybe E3 2013, when it was showing some of the initial trailers for the Order.
Right.
There was definitely that BioShock Infinite thing where it's like, that game that's in that trailer is nothing like the game we actually got at the end.
Right.
But the steps that happened along the way maybe are not totally clear. So I'm curious, and Tyler, I think because you have the most experience with this, that maybe you can, maybe you have a good take on this. Do you feel like the game's marketing and the price point kind of clouded its ability to be well received? Like, if this was instead put out there as an AA game, something that was maybe just an 8-hour experience and maybe it wasn't $60, do you think people would have hated it the way that they did?
Yeah, that's a good question, because this game was marketed AAA $60, and the game itself, I mean, personally, it took me 10 hours to complete the game, but I know that the criticism around this game, a lot of it is, hey, this took me 4 hours to complete, and like a lot of it was just cutscene. So I don't know why I paid $60 for this game that's so short. It's kind of a money spent versus value gained argument. But if it was, I feel like, yes, if it was cheaper, there would have been less backlash, but I still feel like even if it was $30, like the money amount doesn't really matter. It's more the way that they had built up this universe, this game, and what it actually turned out to be. People would still kind of be up at arms. I'm trying to remember, and maybe just because so long ago, but I honestly don't remember too much marketing for this game. I mean, I know I experienced it at the PAX 2014, and obviously E3 showcased it, but beyond that, I really don't remember there being a whole bunch of marketing for this game. People knew about it, and obviously it came out and people bought it, but I don't feel like this game was marketed as much as other games have been marketed.
Like especially for a first party Sony product. That's like
Yeah.
their like initial lineup. It does feel like they maybe sent this game out to die. Did you get that feeling, Rebecca?
Yeah, I definitely got that feeling. And I think it was difficult because it was billed as something that was going to be a launch title, like a big launch title for the studio. And then, I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, but a lot of those first party launch titles kind of fell through. Like Infamous kind of fell through. This one fell through. And so, like when the PS4 launched, we had Knack, which is a cinematic masterpiece, obviously.
Right.
And we had like Killzone, and so we ended up having these games that were like not very substantial, but just ended up making this console look really powerful. And so I felt like when this came out, it almost seemed like it was just a year too late. Like if it had come out at launch, maybe it would have been like, oh yeah, like this looks good on the PS4.
Right.
It's fine that the story is whatever. But I feel like it came like I don't know, whatever the issues were internally, whatever the issues were at the studio. I do feel like it was sent out to die, and it was killed. And on top of that, it just, that's it.
There's no chance for
Like, it's out
resurrection.
there.
It's not
Yeah,
like
there's basically no chance for
it's not like,
resurrection.
a Kingdom of Amalur where, well, the IP is floating around out there somewhere. Eventually, one day, it will have a sequel, but like, that's not the case with this. It's like in the ground forever. So.
And I really wonder, because it seems like this was not a cheap production, like in terms
No.
of the technology that went into it, the talent that
They
they
built
hired.
a whole studio for them to do
Right.
the mocapping.
It just seems like between this and Until Dawn, where it's like, hey, we're gonna go really hard on this like motion capture aspect, and this is where I think about Rise as well, where it's like it's a launch title, there isn't much, but it looks amazing, like it looks like a great game, and I do question, like Rise got roasted at its release as well from the critical press, and I feel like that would be the same way if like the Order was released at launch, even if it was in the same exact quality. I don't think it would have performed much better. Like it would have had that initial sales boost, I think, just from being a launch title. But
Oh, that's interesting.
I think the actual critical reception of the Order, I question what their pitch was, like in terms of, you look at Until Dawn and how they retooled that game, and it's like, oh, it's like a horror movie for your friends, whereas this seems like kind of a Victorian, goth, not cyberpunk, what's the word, steampunk kind of take on it. Like
Sure.
we were talking about that. There's that Horizon documentary by Danny O'Dwyer, the No Clip documentary, and they go into Guerrilla talking about their pitch for like a steampunk kind of product, and then here's the Order, which was pitched before them, and so they were like, oh well, this was kind of a weird expectation thing where we both wanted to have a similar product, and I don't know if that pitch that they gave internally ever really was made strongly outside of there, at least in my experience of what I saw. I didn't see like, here's what this is going to be. I just kind of saw, oh, it's a weird, maybe possibly 4-player co-op experience, which it never was. So did you feel like you had a clear vision of what the game was when it was coming out?
Nope.
Yeah.
No,
No,
because
not at all.
so like I think my expectation before I had any like hands-on experience with it, from E3, it had this like mysterious steampunk, werewolf, vampire, hunter, kind of vibe to it, and I think around this time, Bloodborne was also circulating, or like it was around that time Bloodborne was also out, which was also like a Victorian era story too. But anyway, the Order looked more like it was like a steampunk
hunting vampires game or something like that, where you're dealing with the occult, and there are like monsters, and so you're just kind of protecting the city from these monsters. We don't really know what's going on though, and like that was my expectation going into the game, and unfortunately that's just not what happens, or like what even the universe really is about, which is really weird. And so I don't know what their initial take, the devs vision of this game, if that was what it was supposed to be, or if it was supposed to be more like the E3 game that they had in mind. And maybe, development hell, who knows what happened really, but I find it very difficult to believe that the final product was truly their like actual vision.
I agree. And I think they were stuck standing by something that maybe they didn't 100% believe in, but it was like their baby, so to speak. Especially seeing their kind of team lead talk about it, it's clear that he had a lot of aspirations that maybe didn't come to fruition. So, with that said, I feel like obviously we have to kind of get into the highs and lows of this game, and a lot of that comes in the form of the story, the setting, a lot of the cinematic combat, the environmental storytelling. There's a lot of things that we can touch on here. So, The Order 1886, of course, is the story of an order of knights, descendant from the Knights of the Round Table, who are sort of immortal humans who they say that they sort of serve no one, but their goal is to be kind of supernatural peacekeepers. They're able to do what normal soldiers can't. They're not tied to military or anything, and they're also able to handle things like werewolves and vampires and these kind of threats that maybe the general public should not necessarily know about. They're also extremely fucky. That was kind of weird to me. It was a lot of really attractive people with mustaches. So that was very, very weird and interesting. So it's also an alternate reality, which is something that is a huge part of the story, but it's also kind of tricky to work through. The Marquis de Lafayette, now like 160 years old, is one of the members of the order.
He's the youngest.
Lakshmi Bai, who was a freedom fighter in India, is also here for no reason. And Nikola Tesla is just hanging out. We're all here together in this cool world of ours. So I'm curious. And Olivia, I'm interested to hear from you because I know that we have a similar English background.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, lots of people like to lean into the whole Knights of the Round Table thing. Did you feel like it was used well
No.
here? Like, did you feel like it made any sense at all?
I was very, as a person who had to take, like Arthurian legend in college, I guess I just kept wondering what was the connection. It wasn't super explained well. Like I was like, they make references to Arthur as like this lost king, and I was like, okay, is this actually like what is the difference between Arthurian legend and like what the real connection to this reality is? Because I didn't really understand it. I also feel like when we're talking about Nikola Tesla and like these kind of, stereotypical steampunk characters, it just felt really out of place to me because I just wondered what was the kind of hook there. They have these extremely fucky characters, which, hey, I'm down for. Like, that's cool. But, right?
Always
I just kind of...
fucky.
And it just seemed like a mischaracterization of everyone involved. Like when we talk about Lafayette constantly talking about when people stand in the way of liberté. And like, I didn't understand where I'm like, you're fighting for an empire that's oppressing people. This doesn't seem like something that Lafayette would do, considering he fought against the British in like the Civil War. Like, what is the connection here? And that was just something that personally bothered me. I know I'm getting a little impassioned here about...
Well, I mean, it is weird that Lafayette, like, at the very end of the story was like, Lafayette is a friend to liberty. Lafayette only speaks in the third person now for no reason.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, it just seemed like maybe, like, who was Galahad supposed to be? Like, what was his real... Was he inspired by someone that I didn't really get?
He was inspired by Rick Deckard. That was one of my questions, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Like, what is Sir Galahad's deal? Like, it's clear from the beginning that he is extremely loyal to this order. He's, like, an extremely rule-following, by-the-books kind of stern guy. And then he kind of loses his shit. It goes all over the rails, and then the story just goes like up and down and up and down and up and down, and then it's over, and he turns into Batman. So
Yeah.
you know, so maybe Tyler, you could talk to me a little bit about this. Like, what sense of Galahad did you have? Like, what are his loyalties? What kind of a person is he? What are his motivations?
Well, before I talk about Galahad, I just want to touch on Nicola. Honestly, when I like met Nicola or Nikolai, whatever you want to call him, the Tesla, Mr. Tesla, he felt like James Bond Q. Like he was just in his little basement dungeon, and your only interaction with him is just getting a cool gadget, which you only use a few times, by the way. It's not like a cool gun or anything. It's literally just like which honestly I did enjoy the gadget gave me, but like it was anyway. I was just like, my interaction with him was just like, you're just a Q. You're just this scientist inventor guy whose only purpose in this game is to just give me a gadget that will help me in the future. Who knows when, but it will. And beyond that, like it wasn't, his character wasn't that really well fleshed out or anything. And I don't know. Moving on to Galahad though. So yeah, he's supposed to be the good guy, and he is, but it is a little, his lines are a little blurred because, like Olivia said, you're like fighting for this empire that is suppressing their people considerably. Like I think there's even mention of a revolt happening or on the rise because of just it's poor versus rich. And you get the sense that, yes, Sir Galahad, he has this very esoteric, noble agenda, which is just to fucking do his job of separating the supernatural world from the real world or the society, so that normal people don't have to.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but is that actually the case? Because it seemed like the citizenship knew that there was shit happening.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too, though, is that like even though they were supposed to like have everything kind of hush hush, people fucking knew about the oh god, I don't remember what was the name.
Am I misremembering that? Like Rebecca, is
the
that
half?
true?
Oh, the half.
The half-breeds.
I think it was like some people knew, and then some people
it was
didn't
almost
know.
It was almost like the rats in Dishonored, like people.
Yeah,
like
it was like the poor people who were being picked off by these things.
right. The rich people didn't really have to worry about it. It was more the underclass who had to worry about these diseases and like monsters. Anyway, but yeah,
I'm guessing the point there was that the half-breeds were all of the high-class people, and the
Right.
low-class people were the ones being eaten by the half-breeds.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
So, but yeah, Sir Galahad just is gonna do whatever the fuck he wants. That's pretty evident as far as the story
Sure.
goes. But yeah, I don't know, Olivia, what were your thoughts?
Did we get like a clear motivation for the Order besides like, oh, we're going to, fight off their whole purpose as stated by Lancelot? He's the old guy, right? Remember that correctly? Lancelot is
I don't think he was supposed to be Lancelot. I think they just kept calling him the High Chancellor.
Okay.
He's the Chancellor. Yeah, he's just the.
For some reason, I thought he was Lancelot because I kept being like, "Oh yeah, of course, Lafayette's gonna be Lancelot because he's French," and then it wasn't, and I was just like, "You're killing me."
I'm confused. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
So I guess I just was wondering, like, are they queen and country? Like, is that kind of their thing? Because I could see that, if they're like,
Right.
they're the queen's knights, right? Like that was the thing.
Yeah, I kind of got that vibe that they worked for, or like at least the Chancellor was the one who was kind of talking to the Queen, and she was kind of giving him orders, but it wasn't. The Order always had their own agenda, but again, their agenda is to just keep peace between the supernatural world and just regular folk. And maybe the Queen like had a hand in like the Chancellor influencing him, but I highly doubt it. I feel like it's the other way around, that the Order or the Chancellor was basically just kind of meeting with the Queen because he had to, or because he had to keep up that appearance of he's still compliant with the crown. I don't know.
I know we're kind of going all over the place, but I was also wondering like what there seemed like there was a missing plot line based on one of the like collectibles you find where it's like, where's the Queen? Is she actually real? And then there's all the kind of like rebels who are like talking about like overthrowing the queen who isn't actually there. Did you guys pick up on that as well?
Yeah. It. Yes. I know that was supposed to be. Was it? It was still Queen Victoria in the
Right. Yeah.
canon, right? They hadn't changed that. I know that she basically kind of disappeared from public life in her old age, especially because she had been in mourning from her, Prince Albert for years. And so I don't know if that was what they were trying to play off of. I feel like it's maybe a moment of nuance that didn't quite follow through. Like I think one of the issues with this game obviously is that there's a lot of potential that it doesn't quite reach, and whatever reason that is, development time or just, I don't know, ability, I don't know.
Yeah.
But to that point, I get the sense that there were a lot of people in the Order who believed the Order was doing different things than maybe what it was doing. And so you get someone like Galahad, who's very much like, we bow to nobody. And then you get someone like the Lord Chancellor, who obviously is trying to kind of run this whole community of people based on the fact that he's trying to protect his adopted son. And, then there's this level of like, well, these people are giving us money and they have seats on our council. And so, of course, we're going to ship vampires all over the world for no reason. You know what I mean? So I was kind of under the impression that, I'm guessing that's what another game would have tried to discuss, is sort of this idea that the Order itself was like split in a lot of different ways, with people kind of all over the board trying to use it to their own devices. So I don't think it is ever actually explicitly said this is what they do.
Since we're talking about Galahad, did you think? I kept wondering, like, these people are immortal. They've lived for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
They should know that this shit happens. Like, they are not like Twilight vampires. Like, that's what the kind of like the connection I kept thinking about was like, you have lived for hundreds of years and experienced like multiple revolutions and like different changing monarchies and all that stuff. You should know like your place in this world and how like you could be abused or used. And I kept wondering like, where is that information? Like, it seems like Galahad was like a straight and narrow kind of dude, but I'm like, you've lived for hundreds of years. You had to have like some shades of gray from seeing this. And that was one of my main complaints, where I was like, him and Igraine are just like, oh, hey, what's up? Like, maybe we'll have a relationship, maybe not. And then also, like, there's fucking vampires and shit. Like, we should be more understanding of the world. But, maybe I'm reading too much into him being he could just be a soldier, who doesn't care about that stuff. Did you guys get any of that dissonance as well?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Igraine. Like, I wanted to bring her up because I get that they kind of position her as a foil to Galahad, in the sense that, like, she was his protege the way that he was Percival's protege. Sebastian Mallory, I should say, not Lafayette's. But, she is kind of an interesting character because obviously she's a woman in a position of power during the late Victorian era when women had no power at all. And so there's clearly this, like, the way they introduce her is like some police officer being like, oh, is that gun too big for you, or is it too heavy, or do you need help, or whatever? And then she's very flippant, like, like she has something to prove. But I feel like she was not well written. And I think she was done kind of a disservice because it's like the whole thing where she kind of turns on Galahad seems like it's born out of a romantic jealousy and not out of some kind of loyalty. And it's unclear why she is also not more understanding, like how, if they're all centuries old, like what you said, Olivia, why is there not more understanding? Olivia, how did Igraine read to you, especially, against Galahad?
I do want to make sure I like the turn that she takes is when she sees Galahad with the other woman. Like, I think it's Lakshmi, and I thought that was like a pretty fucked reading of the way that she would work as like two like soldiers or like, comrades in arms and stuff like that. And then also like, even if they do have a romantic relationship, like her whole character arc is like, oh, I trust you, and then I see you with another woman and like, fuck this, I'm done, and I thought that was, as you're saying, it was a huge disservice to the character who, was already kind of leaning these like action girl tropes of like, oh, I'm the badass girl in the group, and then to have this additional like, oh, I'm also like feel jilted, and because of that I'm gonna kill everything, like that I think upset me a little bit. Did you get that reading as well, everyone?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, basically, because if it's not ever implied, well, no, it is implied that maybe Sir Galahad and Igraine had a relationship in the past, or that they may be involved, in this story that's being told, but they never are romantically involved at any point in the story. So whatever her problem is, or whatever whatever relationship that they have, it was something that happened a long time ago. And, you know, like you said, Olivia, these guys have been alive for centuries. Um, like, was this like the beginning, like 200 years ago, and she's still fucking like not over it? And like, what kind of level of relationship was it where you're not over it 200 years later? And then even then, like she does fit that I am the girl in the boys club. I can handle myself. Like, don't you worry about me. And then she gets fucking sidelined by some other chick who like doesn't play that big of a. No, she's like not that important or everything. And Galahad and her and this other girl don't have a relationship at all. Like, it's literally just, you know, for information that he's with her. And like, it's, I don't know, it's really weird. I don't know. Maybe the studio originally, or the writers originally had maybe two different scenarios for her, and they couldn't really decide which one to go with, whether she was going to be like a jilted lover or like this really stalwart soldier. And somehow they put both into the story, but like forgot to connect the dots or something, or forgot to do something. I don't know.
For her to like make that connection, I feel like Galahad had to do some stupid things. And I don't know if you guys agree with that, but like the whole like, I'm not going to communicate about me going to talk to this rebel group that we haven't trusted, and I'm going to make a whole like change of allegiances, just felt really unearned in my experience. Like, I was just wondering, like, why wouldn't he try to talk to this green person who he had like a super special relationship with? They've like literally like died and come back to life through a werewolf like in the last 24 hours. I think you guys should have, you know, a closer connection. And I just kept wondering, like, okay, Sir Galahad, you've like, I know you've lost your, you know, mentor and friend, but like you're doing some like outlandish stuff, like trying to take over a, you know, airship without like trying to get more support for your cause.
Right.
I don't know if either of you felt that way when it came to like, hey, for a grain to be pissed, we have to make Galahad do unrealistic stuff. But that was kind of my read on it.
I think it was another one of those points where it's sort of not clear where the direction was going on that, because different to what Tyler was saying, I read their relationship as being something that it sounded like, because when they're in the asylum, in the hospital level, at one point, Galahad says something to the effect of like, you know, when will you decide to listen to me? And she says, well, you'll have to get father's permission first, like, to marry me, right? And it seemed almost as like Galahad was the one putting the brakes on that, like some sort of duty to the order or some kind of overarching fulfilling whatever, was keeping him from falling into that, like, we're going to get married secretly or whatever, where Igraine was almost more flexible on that. Like, she was like, who cares? Just, you know, like, let's just do it or whatever. And so I think it seems like a stupid move for him to not let her in. But at the same time, it seemed like, based on his conversations with Mallory and based on Mallory basically dying in the, you know, airship Crystal Palace disaster, and knowing that Mallory had been talking to the shady hooded figure guy who's like hanging around, it seemed like he was trying to protect Igraine. Like, he was trying to not kind of drag her down this, you know, hole with him, because he didn't know where it was going to go. And he knew that, you know, based on Mallory's funeral, and the Lord Chancellor is like, well, he was egotistical and he pursued his own things and he deserved to die. And then Alistair being like, that was kind of mean, actually. I feel like he understood the gravity of what he was doing. And so I assumed that kind of narrative dissonant break was him trying to be like, I don't want to bring her and I don't want to bring Lafayette into it, because I don't want them to like go down on a ship for something that I think is right, because I could be wrong. That was the reading I got.
Gotcha. Does she explicitly state something? Like, I remember when she's like injured and they're in the asylum, and then she says something like, people like us don't get to be happy, or like don't get to be together. Right. So there was like an explicit like, hey, like, we would be together if our like cause or like job role wasn't preventing us. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. And that's an interesting point too, because it kind of alludes to this sterilization for being in the order, either by like the blood that they ingest, or like they literally kind of mutilate their genitals, so they can't have.
Wait, where did you get that part from?
Because she was like, "We can't be happy." I thought she was kind of like referencing them.
I think that was the rules of the order. I don't think that had anything to do with.
Well, I don't know. I just
Takes
got.
it a
I had
whole
this.
other level.
I had the. Oh, I did totally take it
Yeah,
to
like,
another
hold
level where
on.
we're not.
I don't think we
Like,
played
they're
the same
not
game.
allowed to have babies. Like, it's not that they aren't allowed to, but like they physically cannot because this substance that they have to consume to be in the order is like, prevents them from doing so. I don't know.
That is an interesting thought, though, because that reminds me of, and I know that we're recording this at a different point in time, so I can't say next month, but I know that our March cast is Dragon Age Origins,
Yes,
which
the Grey
deals with
Warden.
the concept of a blood making someone sterile. Like that is like tied into this like magical blood thing.
Mhm.
And so I could see from that end that is a trope that has been used before, and so that would be an interesting way to think about it. Sorry, that just made me think
No,
of the
yeah.
of the.
Well,
Dirk
that's kind of
Bundle.
like what I thought so too, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. But anyway, Olivia, were you saying something? I can't remember.
I think just to pick it back up on like where the order like lies and their intentions and like how this plays into the romantic love of the characters. I guess I agree with you when we talk about how like when you brought up specifically how like their patrons and like every single member of the order maybe had their own like long-term vision for what they were going to do. I think I would hope that maybe that was part of the original game plan where it was like, hey, we're going to show off, the different facets of the order. And I feel like a lot of that stuff was probably cut because we don't get any of it. I feel like there was a bigger vision about what this project was going to be in terms of the game and how like they were going to politically position everyone. Because I feel like it's such an interesting time to talk about like, the East India Company and how that like plays into colonization across the country or across the world. And I just guess I really missed that aspect of it. Like something critical, like was the part that I wanted, and maybe it was told through subtext, but I didn't really get any like, hey, maybe colonization is bad. Hey, maybe like except for explicit, like we brought vampires to India and like, fuck, wasn't that shitty? Like, I guess that was the part that I kept wondering where I'm like, no, there was more to that. Like there was more to like why colonization was bad than vampires coming in.
Right.
And, I think that was the part that I really missed where I'm like, hey, we're doing bad shit. What was our intention for doing that? And like them trying to justify why colonization was needed or like why they're like oppressing the poor people and like sex workers in the one shitty part of town they have to keep going back to. And like I just want something critical coming from their perspective, and I never saw that. And I guess that was my main issue where I'm like, why are you doing this? You aren't like explicitly telling us why, and I don't know why. So
yeah, absolutely. To follow up on that, I think too the game also tried to leverage its own like historical alt history telling because it put in Lakshmi Bai, it put in the Marquis de Lafayette to sort of be like, here are some very iconic freedom fighters that people probably will have some kind of reference for. And I almost feel like that was meant to kind of signal some kind of larger storyline, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like some kind of I don't know. I think it's like to what you said. Like, is this supposed to be a treatise on colonization? Is it supposed to be a treatise on what freedom really means? Is it supposed to be a treatise on like democracy? Is it supposed to be a treatise on capitalism? Where was that going? Did you guys? I guess did the use of those freedom fighters, did that mean anything to you? Were you ever like, I see where this is going, or did that feel really out of left field?
I think
Go ahead.
specifically for Lafayette, I just kept like his characterization as a playboy, like that almost like French stereotype in terms of like, oh, it's like the Pepe Le Pew kind of dude who's like always going around like hitting on people and like trying to get his jollies or whatever.
I thought of him as like fucking Dragon Age. He was the Dorian of Dragon Age in the Order. Anyway, continue.
I guess I just wondered like why this could be anyone, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing all he kept saying was like, oh, I fought in America, and people are like going crazy about that, and it just seemed completely antithetical to like who Lafayette in the modern context of America, what he represents. And then for Lakshmi, it just seemed like you're the only person of color here, and of course you're going to be someone I just kept wondering like they just want to put someone in here who is like, a person of color represents that perspective. And, I can't read into their intentions, but that's what it felt like to me in terms of like, hey, we need some other aspect and like colonization is bad. That's kind of how I read it, but I know it's a super baseline take. What did you think, Tyler?
I mean, it wasn't it was just, I feel like it was just like another thing. Like they could have had a different story arc that was going on there and maybe had to cut it short, and that's what we got. But I feel like it was just kind of misplaced, honestly. It was just like, well, we're following, we just had our first interaction with the supernatural, but here we are now going to add another angle to the story, which is actually that there's a rebellion. There are two rebels who are leading a rebellion, and here's why. Like, here's the reason why for this rebellion is because I forget his name. He's the guy shipping the vampires over to India, and it's just like,
Oh, Lord Hastings.
yeah, Lord Hastings. And it's just like, okay, and then of course it also it's also a plot device to insert the betrayal of Lord Hastings as well, and like have that kind of corruption within the order, which you thought that was supposed to be this very pure, community. So I don't know. I didn't. It wasn't that great of a plot device, honestly. Like that was one of the part of the I think actually that part. The very beginning where you're like firing at people on the rooftops is the part that you played at the PAX demo, and so that part wasn't that great for me. But yeah, I don't know. It was just I don't. There's not a lot for me to say on it,
Mm-hmm.
What did you think, Rebecca? Because I'm interested to get your take on like using historical figures as like a signifier for something.
It's another one of those things where I wanted to like it, and I think it was like I was under the impression that it would have been something that would have been explored more in the sequel, especially the way that the game kind of leads up to its ending and sort of the post credits or mid credits sequence or whatever. There's kind of a final conversation, obviously, that Lafayette has with Galahad, where he says, like, I believe that you have reason to be doing what you're doing, even if I don't know what it is or I don't understand it. And I am just telling you straight up that what I care about is liberty.
Mhm.
And if you stand in the way of that, then obviously
I'll cut you down.
I have a sworn desire to stop that because this is what I stand for. And so then he's kind of says to Galahad, like, well, I hope we see each other again. And Galahad says, like, we will. And so I was kind of under the impression that then a sequel or whatever would have come in, and then, maybe Lafayette would be kind of a hero again. Like, he would get to be sort of a savior of the people again, and they would kind of lean more into his history as a military commander and as like a strategist, and then he could, he really would be fighting for liberty because at the end of the game, like, London is under martial law and now there's like shit everywhere and it's dangerous, and it seems like these people are being controlled by the people in power, who are the people who are shipping vampires all over the world and are half breeds and whatever. So I feel like that was what they were trying to do, and that maybe with more time or another game they would have been able to achieve it. And so I almost feel like, I don't want to say that I feel like Lafayette was missed potential, but just that he could have been so much more, and maybe he would have been so much more, but instead we're just kind of stuck with Lafayette being token French sexy guy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, it
With
does.
with Lakshmi Bai, I do agree that I think she was kind of used, like, hedged in as a person of color, but I know that their development lead, I believe, is also Indian. And so I kind of was under the impression that he was trying to tell a little bit of a personal story through her and through Devi, and wanting to bring in her as kind of a cultural icon and as someone else who could be a knight in her own right, even if she was not a part of the order as we understood it from the game's perspective. But again, I think maybe not a lot of people even know who she is to know what she stands for. And I think if it was to be about, like, I mean, there's that whole sequence where they look at a shipping ledger and they're like, wow, they've already shipped them to India.
Right.
But then that was the end of the conversation. You know what I mean? Like, it just was missed potential, I think. And that's kind of unfortunate in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree.
So, we have kind of an interesting group of, characters with a lot of their own motivations. They have some kind of weird relationship stuff. People don't take Lafayette seriously. Obviously, Galahad and Percival are very close. Um, once Mallory dies in the airship incident, um, we start to see a new side of Galahad that we've never seen before, because up until that point, he's very cut and dry. He's very stoic. He's very kind of stern soldier man. But then he starts to kind of go off the rails, right? He has to chase this, woman down. He's like one man murdering everybody on the bridge, and people are like, dude, calm the F down, dude. Like, it's all right. And he's like, no, I gotta murder everyone. Did you feel like that turn of character was believable? Did it make sense? Or do you feel like it was more of a plot device? Maybe Olivia, you could jump in on this one. Or Tyler.
It doesn't matter. I was just saying, it was a more interesting turn, I feel. I didn't really get into him until then, because it was just like,
oh, okay.
I mean, like, honestly, like, I didn't feel very connected with him, even though, I normally don't mind playing people who are just straight and true. It was, I guess, because I had played.
You finally had some personality, right?
Right. He, until then, he was very like cut and dry. I'm a white knight. Very valorous and whatever. And then, that shit happens, and he's suddenly not a completely different person, but he has more to him than you initially thought. And it just, I think that's what, like 3 or 4 hours into the game, and you're finally like, oh, thank God, he has personality. He is human.
Well, they withhold so much information. I feel like I kind of had an idea of like, okay, here's what the black goo thing they're drinking is, and like here's what the order's intentions are. But like until Percival dies and they do the whole like explanation of their order, I don't feel like we really understood what they were doing. I feel like that's just an important thing I wanted to say, because I just felt like I was super confused by it and needed to get that out there, because I'm like, you waited till 4 hours in to like start building characterization and start giving a backstory, and that seemed like a strange choice to me. Did you guys get that at all? Or
well, I mean, yeah, like I was saying, you're pretty much until that point, like, it's just you're going to these places doing these things because the quests are telling you to do so. And it's just not like I didn't really have a, connection with anyone until then, that's like when I started to kind of feel for someone with the character and I don't know, Rebecca, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely got the sense that this was the way that they were trying to show normalcy. With the understanding that, like, this is a kind of relationship that Galahad has with Percival, and this is who he has with Lafayette, and this is who he has with Igraine. So that when they kind of come in with these hot reveals, I think it was just sort of meant to be almost a juxtaposition. And so they, like, up until the point at which the story goes off the rails, then it's like this day-to-day stuff is literally just their job, right? You walk through the building, you find the rebels, you come, you kill them, everybody's safe, the end, right? And so it's almost like a very rote kind of a thing, where like to them the whole Blackwater whatever is totally normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got the sense that they were trying to say that what was specifically happening in this story was abnormal even to people who already are abnormal. Like, it was like another layer of weird, I guess. But I don't know if that was done well, to be honest with you.
It does kind of like ratchet up to 11, like, and you definitely get Galahad's like, he's having that like breakdown as he finds like Sebastian's body, and I just kind of wanted to, I guess like the queer in me was just like, yeah, they're gay, like this is like doing a queer reading of that moment. And like your response, especially when like Igraine's dying, and you're just kind of like, whatever, it's cool.
Yeah.
And like I'm just gonna leave
like
you on
Sebastian's dying. It's like, no.
Yeah, like whenever Igraine's like injured and they split up, he just kind of like leaves her on a bed and just like, I gotta go investigate stuff. But then like once Sebastian's dead, the level of emotion, and I get that's the intention of that scene when he's like going through the burning airship thing. I guess I just kept wondering like why, like, you're a soldier. I know this was your mentor, but this seemed like something that, could be expected. Like, everyone kept telling you guys that, like, I can't protect you. Like, things are going to go really bad. And, like, I didn't really see a way out for any of them on that airship. And I just kept wondering, like, okay, the level of emotional... To feel this upset about something, I feel like the connection has to be deeper than just, like, co-workers or something.
Mhm.
And I get that it was his teacher, but I'm like, they're gay. Like, that's just what my reading of the story was that they had a romantic connection because they seemed like the only person that he actually trusted out of everyone.
Right.
And like, I know you could probably read that as a teaching moment as well. Like, oh, here's my mentor who's like guiding me through life, but I'm just holding out hope that they bone.
There's definitely a few moments that could have been queer moments, but then were almost like ruined by the story just being whatever it was. Like, I actually had like kind of a queer reading on Lakshmi Bai and Devi, not realizing that Devi
Uh-huh.
was actually her daughter, and then I was
Mhm.
like,
Right.
my bad. But that's almost what it felt like, because it felt like a very similar protege-mentor kind of relationship, where Devi was kind of coming and being like, do you really want to do this weird shit with this random guy who tried to kill us like 6 times? In the same way that I think Galahad was kind of foiling Percival in that way, where it's like, hey, who was that weird guy you were talking to? Igraine, don't talk to me right now. I'm busy talking to Percival. You know what I mean? And so
Right.
it almost felt like those moments were like, well, it could have been something, but there's a lot of in this game, I think, which is sad.
Yeah.
Did you read any of those moments, Tyler?
Well, yeah, definitely with Debbie and what's her name? But the
Oh, Lakshmi.
Lakshmi, yeah, definitely with her because I was like, oh my fuck, there's lesbians in here, awesome. And then there's like, I'm her
I know,
daughter.
the
Like,
lesbians are here.
like,
It's like, no, never mind.
Okay, fine, whatever. It's daughter and mother, which is fine. That's fine. But yeah, no, definitely. I kind of felt that way with Sir Galahad. I thought it was more. I don't. Maybe not Sir Galahad, but definitely Lafayette. I felt was just kind of like a playboy. He's like
Yeah.
he'll have sex with anything as long as it's a good time, kind of a deal. Again,
He definitely had that like queer trope of just like the almost feminine, like where he's like, oh, I'm
He's
like a
very
playboy,
saucy.
but also I care about what I wear. I like have very finely manicured. They all have finely manicured mustaches.
Oh, they do.
So I guess that's
I mean,
not a fair
that's-
reading.
but yeah,
I think you could also do a queer reading on Tesla
a little
and
bit.
Tesla's kind of admiration for Galahad.
Yeah.
Like, he spent a lot of time trying to impress him, and it was very clear that there was a definite, like, he was very attached to Galahad to the point where he's the one that goes out of his way to save Galahad, and like the only reason why he doesn't die basically is because Tesla was like white knighting him this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So there, yeah, I agree with you guys on those moments. I think are very interesting.
Yeah.
Knowing that the story kind of ratchets up to 11 repeatedly, especially at that kind of midpoint where Mallory dies. What are you guys' thoughts on the big reveals? Like, there's a couple. There's obviously the vampires, then the whole thing about like the fact that Lord Hastings is a vampire, and then Sir Lucan is actually a werewolf, and everything you ever knew was a lie. Like, it comes in really hot and fast there at the end.
Were
I'm
werewolves,
curious.
I mean, were vampires telegraphed at all before we find the vampire in the box? Because that was something I kept wondering. Like, I didn't expect a vampire.
It's just the Ripper thing. So they mention the Jack the Ripper thing at one point, and then in the first time you're going through Whitechapel, when it's Galahad and Lafayette, they kind of like sneak through a passage, and then there's a woman in the corner, and she's crying like, I didn't know it was him, like the Ripper got her, like I didn't even know, and then that's all you get. And then until you get to the point where Lord Hastings is like full frontal nudity, like, yes,
Oh,
'tis
yeah.
I. There was a lot of penis in this game.
There was.
'Tis I, the Reaper. Like,
It just,
I don't know.
It just seemed, I guess for me, I just kept wondering, like, if you, it didn't feel telegraphed in a way besides, like, he's definitely evil. Like, he's part of, like, some shit. And then I just, like, when they opened the box with the vampires, I was just like, okay, I guess there's vampires in this game. Like, I kept thinking, like, this is just ridiculous that you keep adding new elements without giving a proper explanation. And I'm like, I know we exist in a world where magical creatures exist and there are werewolves, like, that's been shown. But, like, I just kind of wish that I had known there were vampires in this world. Like, or what else can exist in this world? Like, are all creatures evil? Like, are all the evil creatures of mythology actually in here? Like, and it just didn't feel earned to me in a way that, like, oh yeah, I feel like really impassioned now that vampires are involved. Or like, hey, you've been telegraphing this guy's evil, and like your friend, the guy who's played by the android from Aliens.
Oh, he actually is not played by Michael Fassbender, but he was modeled after Michael Fassbender.
Oh, okay.
In case you're wondering.
I thought
that's a pro tip for you right there.
God, the Wikia for the Order 1886 lied to me. I'll need to correct that. But I guess I just kept wondering, like, this seems very, stereotypical in terms of like, hey, here's the guy who's going to turn on you, and it it makes it feel even worse that they were trying to like model this after Blade Runner, in my opinion, because I'm like,
Right.
Yeah.
hey, like that's a story all about subtlety and about
I
like,
didn't.
hey, what's the nature of humanity? Whereas this didn't really try to answer those questions.
Yeah, I didn't get the Blade Runner thing, so.
Yeah, I think the problem with the subtlety too is that they were subtle in maybe the wrong ways. Especially the whole telegraphing of the vampires, like when they find that manifest that basically shows that like the super evil villains are just shipping vampires all over the world so they can take over the world as vampires.
Mhm.
That is like a hysterical plot concept, which they just go like, of course they are. Moving on. You know what I mean? Like that's not the point where I needed subtlety. You know what
Right.
I mean? It was like, oh, okay, it's just that they're just going for world domination. Is that what this is about? Nah, we're okay. Okay, we're all good on that. Yeah.
Like the
I
plotting.
almost laughed like at
Mhm.
that point. I was just like, I couldn't even believe like that was where the story had gone, and it was just like, oh jeez.
Like the plotting, I think was very much like, hey, here's some like really like unearned reveals that we're just gonna throw out here. And like,
Mhm.
oh shit, they're on the airship that we didn't really know they were gonna like we kind of knew they were gonna take this airship, but what if this is the nature of airships in this world? I guess
Yeah.
like it was just like very poor in terms of setting expectations and like giving you like that Chekhov's gun of like, hey, here's the thing
Yeah.
that's gonna happen. And also the characterization was super wooden. Like it didn't seem like those characters really gave a fuck about anything, or like they didn't really
Yeah.
have goals. And those are like the two, in my opinion, like the two tenets of storytelling, and they didn't
Uh-huh.
really meet either of those, in my opinion. So I kind of just wish they, you know, picked something, even if they were wooden characters, if the story was kind of fun and not like super grimdark. Like that's the.
Mhm.
I just wish they like maybe recognized how ridiculous it all was and maybe like kind of played with that a little bit. Like that would have, in my opinion, been a better choice than, you know, leaning all the way into like I'm Batman at the end.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm under the impression that Alistair being Sir Lucan was meant to be a telegraph that he was actually a half breed,
Mhm.
like Sir Lucan the Lycan.
Mhm.
But I don't like when it came out that he was a half breed. I was just like, really?
Yeah, it was
Like so what? Like that was
okay.
the
And you
thing I
named
kept
him and you
thinking.
named him Sir Lucan. Like what? Like and that almost feels like a bad fanfic or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got some elements of like this is like Archive of Our Own here. Like that's what I kept thinking was
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
what's like he's a vampire, but I mean he's a werewolf, but to what end? Like
Right.
maybe other people knew and you weren't allowed to know, Sir Galahad. Like there was no element of like subtlety there, and I just felt
Uh-huh.
really, I guess I felt really let down because I'm like, you put so much time and effort into the trappings of this game, but not
Mhm.
the individual like why are we doing this when this game is based all around stories. Like that's the
Right.
main hook here is that this story is really interesting and cool, but you couldn't deliver on that.
Right.
So I kind of before we move into like I feel like eventually, you know, we just I mean there's not a lot to say about the story other than the fact that it had some struggles. I think it didn't realize itself. But it did do some cool things in terms of like, you know, there was a lot of cool ideas at play that never really came to fruition. And so, you know, before we jump into maybe looking at it more technically as a cinematic game for the combat and things like that, I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts on the ending. Not necessarily the part at which Sir Galahad becomes Batman, but I think it's an interesting end where, you know, Galahad has to go, or he feels compelled to go save Tesla for the fact that Tesla saved him. And, you know, you spend a little while fighting sort of through the catacombs until you're eventually having this final confrontation with Alistair, which, you know, the Lord Commander, what was his name? Lord Commander, whatever. He shows up and is the Lord Chancellor. He shows up and he is sort of like, well, here was the secret I've been hiding all these years. He wasn't really my son, and also he was a
Right.
half-breed. Now you have to kill him, because I can't do it, and then I'll just let you leave, and I won't say anything about it. I well, I want to hear what you guys think about it, because I personally was a little disappointed by how it was, I don't know, I guess the way that it came to an ending, but I still felt like that final action where Galahad just sort of has his gun pointed at Alistair and it's up to you when you choose to pull the trigger. I thought that was very moving, and like that was a really powerful moment that didn't feel much like what you said earlier, Olivia. It didn't feel earned because it didn't feel like it had the same kind of gravity as, like, it had too much gravity, I guess I should say, for like the weird kind of dialogue around it. Tyler, what was your thoughts on the ending?
Well, I will say I pulled the trigger, and the reason is because 10 minutes ago he fucking betrayed me. like you know, like it I feel like, unfortunately, the setup for these kind of scenarios or for these reveals, the game doesn't give you a lot of time to process what you're going through, and so like we find out the Marshall guy is a vampire, and we also find out that Alistair is a half-breed werewolf, and he's actually been doing bad shit for a while, and that happened like 20 or 30 minutes ago, and now here I am in a fight with him, and yeah, I'm gonna fucking kill him because he betrayed me and like hurt Tesla, and like it's just like so it doesn't give you a bunch of time to either for Alistair to redeem himself or for any of these characters to like redeem themselves or really give you any, in my opinion, any like reason to save them or any other like thought than what the just basic general thought would be. Is either, is he bad? If he's a bad guy, you just go ahead and like end his life. The ending I thought was, it felt very rushed. You don't get a lot of closure for things. It leaves way more questions than it does answers. It doesn't really wrap up the experience that you've had for the past 4 to 5 hours, other than like resolution of, okay, you figured out that there are vampires being shipped all over the world. Half-breeds exist. The Chancellor was keeping this a secret forever and a day for whatever reason, and no reason at all, maybe even. And like, who else is the Klingon in the ship? Like, who else is a half-breed in our order? And now the order that you thought was noble and pure is actually corrupt. And so it's just kind of like, well, where does the story even go from here? And then it just kind of ends. And maybe you'll get another story, or maybe you won't. Who knows? And that's just kind of my take on the ending. It's a little unfortunate that it just kind of ended that way. Again, I feel like the studio, it all goes back to studio and maybe management of the game, and who knows what was going on, and they might have just had to throw something in there that felt like closure, even though to me it didn't really feel like closure. So
yeah, I'd agree. And I need some clarification, because was that actually a choice? Like, could you walk away without shooting him?
No.
Okay.
No, it just, you could, when I first played it, I remember I just was curious, and he will just stand there pointing the gun at Alistair until you choose to pull the trigger. Like, it just is a forever moment, pretty much.
Okay, because I honestly was like, the whole ending where he's like, oh, here you go, here's a gun, shoot him. I was just like, this is like, why? Like, what is the purpose behind this? Like, you are just kind of here. And I just kind of was hammering on the shoot button because I'm like, I bet you're going to let him shoot him. And it just kind of immediately went. So, not the most sanctimonious ending. But there was at least a feint during the fight, like right before, you're fighting the werewolf, where he's like, we're the same. Like, why do you get to exist and I don't? And I was like, oh, that's like maybe an interesting idea, because Galahad seems like a person who's maybe like, there's no shades of gray. There's only good and bad.
Right.
And I wish this idea had been explored. Like, this should have maybe been the central theme of what was happening here. And I agree with Tyler that, they're probably under immense pressure to get the game out before when the PS4 launched, and every month that passed was kind of like, oh, this is like losing its effect on like what the desired purpose of the game was, versus like show the technical powerhouse of the PS4. So I would probably guess that's why they had to ship it out so early, without a good resolution. But
yeah,
before I move on to the technical stuff, I just wanted to bring up like all of the enemies in this game maybe had some poor reasoning, like the people in the asylum, where he's just like, I was just like, wow, are we really just gonna like fight like people who are they were in Bedlam, weren't they?
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, oh, this is like maybe
Bedlam.
a horrible. Yeah, like, this is like a horrible place to be. Like, these people, if they do have mental illnesses, weren't treated correctly. And then they're just like, yeah, we're just going to kill these fuckers. Like, that was kind of the whole, like, there wasn't any real critique there. And then during the fight in Whitechapel, where I think I remember them talking about, like, these godless rebels or whatever. And I'm like, is, like, this is the Christian, like, Protestant, like, belief system here part of the the order? Because it isn't really addressed anywhere else. Right. It just kind of seemed like, here's like some weird, not totally congruous ideas that they just kind of throw out from in like the language, like little like barks during the fight scenes that I didn't really it just seemed all really like poor characterizations about why you're fighting people and what the point is, and like that. I guess that bothered me. I kept thinking about it, like, oh, I wish I knew why we were fighting these people. Why are the Bedlamites bad? Like, what's the kind of like, what is their idea? And then at the end where it's just like, you have to kill him because you're the good man and you're the soldier. I was just like, it doesn't really like fit with everything else that's happened in the last 20 minutes. So it seems a little unfair for you to do that.
This game reminds me a lot in the style of Uncharted.
Yeah.
I think it's almost very, very similar to Uncharted, but I feel like Uncharted gets a pass in its stupid-ass combat because it has a compelling story, sort of. But more than that, it has compelling characters. It's like fun. It's like what you said. Like, even when it hits these kind of weird supernatural notes, or even when it hits these kind of heavy, dour sort of notes, it still does not take itself so seriously that it's not like you're having a good time with your friends kind of a thing. And then it almost feels like the fact that you have to slaughter 50 random guys who probably are not really bad people. They're just like have a job to do or something. Like, we just kind of, that sort of gets a pass. And so I do feel like it is interesting to kind of compare this game to Uncharted, because I think they are coming from similar ilks, but obviously Uncharted was more successful at what it did. I do think it's interesting that you brought up the aspect of Christianity, because that was also something I was hung up on, especially in replays, because I know that a lot of the characters kind of mention like, oh my god, or god, whatever, and then in that fight sequence when you get the thermite rifle for the first time, and you have that guy who's like the police whatever, and he gets shot and he dies. Lafayette says something like, "Oh, like may his soul rest in peace," and then Galahad just goes, "Well, there's no God to save him." So it's like, it almost seemed like there was some kind of larger supernatural thing at work, but it was totally unaddressed, and I'm guessing that was more one of those we didn't have time for that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I noticed that as well. So in talking about the thermite rifle, one of the things that I really liked about this game was that I thought the combat was cool as hell, because it had that kind of cinematic quality to it. There were a lot of environmental things that could be shot at and would fly around, and it felt very heavy and exciting and explodey and stuff. What did you guys think about the combat? Tyler, I know that you are not like a first-person shooter kind of a guy, and obviously this is like sort of a third-person shooter, but how'd you feel about the combat?
Right.
How did it feel to you? Did it feel punchy? Did it feel fun?
So it definitely. So yeah, I'm not a first-person shooter, and this game, I think the biggest part of this game where I struggled was the actual combat, but it was more of the sense of like, I just can't fucking aim.
Oh yeah. That's fine. Did you use the black sight? Like, did that help you? Because I know the black sight is basically bullet time, essentially.
Yes. So yes, that was nice, because it didn't matter if I aimed or not. It was just like, it'll automatically pan around, and just shoot everyone, which was nice. And it would kill them normally. So I did appreciate that. I thought that was cool, because it was almost like I was McCree from Overwatch, and just like, it's high noon and just like kill everyone. But
it's high noon all the time.
Right. I think I ran around mostly with a shotgun when I could. I liked how there was a lot of weapon variants, and how the beginning weapons were kind of like, okay, they were your regular like assault rifle or like machine gun or whatever. It just, your typical automatic. And I think you had then like your handgun. But I think I enjoyed like the cannon, which was like the handgun that like once you did a headshot or anything like that, they fucking died. You only had like 3 bullets though, and it was basically like a small shotgun in your hand. I don't know. I enjoyed the weapon variances. The actual combat itself did seem punchy. Like, when I shot someone, they fucking like recoiled. The problem maybe I had with it was it was just a little difficult to shoot at them, and they didn't have like health bars or anything, so you really didn't know if they were close to dying or what. I remember shooting at guys a lot, and they wouldn't go down, and I realized you had to kind of hit them like twice in a row almost for them to be defeated. Like, if you just shot at them once or twice, they would almost heal back up kind of in that. I don't really know how the mechanic of the combat worked in terms of the enemies, but I just know that if I shot them in like the knee or something and then the head, they would fucking die. I don't know if that's because I did a headshot or because I shot them in the knee at the same time, but I also noticed, if I shot them in the head or if I like tried to shoot them in the head but it hit them, I don't know, in their chest or something, they would not die or whatever, even if it was a weird thing. That was the only problem or thing that I had trouble with when it came to the combat, was just trying to figure out who had the lowest health or who could I pick off so that they can die, so that I can like have an easier time. Because there's times where you're like fighting 20 people and it's just you. I mean, like, like you have your companions, but they don't do a lot, unfortunately.
Sure.
So I basically did the shotgun or like the cannon gun. And then I think I did like the hunter's rifle. Or I can't remember what it was, but it was essentially like the sniper rifle. So,
do you feel like you had a similar experience, Olivia?
Yeah, I guess for me, the weapons that I really enjoyed using with like the rifle that had the little air blaster on it. I thought that was kind of a fun inversion on like, hey, here's what the common like third person shooter weapons are. I really liked the flame gun thing where you would shoot.
The thermite gun was amazing.
Yeah, the
that was thermite rifle.
That was super cool. And I was like, man, I want to use this thing more and I want to use the electric gun more. Like these seem like great weapons. That would be like a fun, like they're different. It's like a Ratchet and Clank kind of weapon system. And I wanted more of that. I didn't use the black guard system that much, or black eye. I don't really, what is it called?
Oh, black sight.
Black sight. Yeah, I guess I kept using it, and then I kept like I did miss the little prompt where it's like use the right stick to aim, so I just kept shooting dead bodies, and I was like, this isn't super useful. Like that was my experience with it. And then I just kept getting bum rushed. Like that was the part of the game that I really didn't enjoy, was that in the fight in Whitechapel where you're kind of like taking a position where it's like, okay, there's a trench dividing you, and they keep like kind of coming. I think I died on it like 3 or 4 times, and I'm usually pretty good at those kinds of games. And I just wondered, like, am I not managing my enemies correctly? Like, what's the best way to play this? And I would just get bum rushed by a shotgunner and then go down and then pray that he wouldn't shoot me again before I could revive. And I guess that really bothered me. And like the stealth sections I thought were like surprisingly decent, but I still wondered why there was a stealth section in the game.
Yeah. So that's a good point where I wanted to kind of bring up. Well, I guess I should ask if you had I wanted to know. Okay, I want to know what your favorite levels were. Like, I was curious if there were any that stood out to you, and also if you had any least favorite levels. To the point where I will say that I hated that stealth section. It was so frustrating to me.
Yeah, I think that stealth section, like the one on the ship, was at least short, but then the one where you're like going, like I thought the crossbows were super. Yeah, the courtyard one. I'm like, you have crossbows. I'm like, this is kind of fun. I like sneaking around, and then I got through the first section of the first 2 sections without like a problem, and then I just kept running into a dude who would shoot me in the head, and I'm like, are we really like, this is what we're doing in like 2014? People know like this is like a stereotype to like make a game with a stealth section that's bad. So, but that level where you're fighting on the bridge, like I died a few times on that, but I still really enjoyed it. Like I still thought that like this was making the best use of like, hey, you're fighting weapons, you're with a team of people, you're like actually like making forward progress. And I thought that was the most fun that I had in that game, was that kind of like, hey, you're fighting with rebels trying to get to the carriage thing. I wished the whole game was like that.
Yeah, I understand. Tyler, did you have any favorite levels?
Yeah,
or not favorite levels?
I think I have a few. I really enjoyed like the hospital, just because it was like, I don't know, I felt like in terms of level design it was pretty neat. Like things were just spaced out differently, and it felt like I was actually like exploring a hospice area. But and then of course like it was like the first time I think you encounter something actually supernatural, which was nice. And then I think again that stealth level in the courtyard, first half was great. I felt like I was I don't know, like Assassin's Creed or something. And then the second time was just awful. Like I literally spent like an hour, 30 minutes to an hour trying to get past that second part, and I'm like, why? Because there's no reason for this. Like either they should have just had it. I understand they want it to be a stealth part, but like if I get discovered, don't have it be a one-hit KO. Just fucking let me kill the guys that I now have to face. Like I don't know. I finally got it. Like But I don't know. That was my like least favorite. I also like the airship too. That was pretty neat. Just kind of going through, not necessarily the part where you're actually like the initial part, but when you actually finally get into the inside of the airship was pretty neat. So
Yeah, I think I just want to say as well that the airship, like the look of that level, especially the opening of it when you're like when it's starting to go down and like you're going through the kitchens. Like
Yeah,
I posted a video
right.
where I was just like shooting the little pans because I was like, this is really cool. They have physics and like
Mm-hmm.
the when they're like releasing people with the air balloons, like the air machine kind of things. I was like, oh, that's like a neat idea. That I'm glad that they were able to like let us see this because it looks beautiful. Like the entire game looks amazing, but you're still fighting through corridors, which I wasn't a huge fan of.
Sure. Um, to that end, I guess, how did you feel the gameplay flowed? Because there was a lot of like like there was exploration, there was combat, obviously, and then there were these other moments of like lock picking. There was the panel override little machine mini
Which I
game.
enjoyed.
There was like a Morse code section. Did you guys feel that that was a natural flow? Was there some you liked more than others? Is there some you wish you were used more? How was the gameplay flow to you? Maybe Tyler. I know you said you liked the panel mini game.
Yeah, I did, surprisingly. Because when again, Nikola Tesla was just like, "Oh, here's this thing I've made for you. This is this neat gadget. Here you go, on your way." And like that's it. And I was like, "What the fuck is this shit? Like, what is going on?" And then you finally actually use it. And I was like, "Oh my god, this is actually kind of neat." It took me like a hot second to figure out exactly what I was supposed to do, but after once you figure it out, you're like, "Oh, okay, great." And it unlike the other parts of the game, I feel like that panel override will actually fit into the universe or like what you were doing. It never felt out of place and not like overly annoying. Like it never came up and I was like, oh man, not this again. Like, or like seriously, this is why would I need to do this for this thing? Using that though was nice. The other, like the flow of the game, though, I'm not entirely sure. It felt like, I mean, again, it kind of goes from combat to cutscene to combat to lockpicking to stealthing to whatever. And it didn't, in my opinion, it wasn't as smooth as of a transition.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, like, I will praise it on going seamlessly from combat to a cutscene because, like, there are times where I thought could still control my character, and I was like, "Oh fuck, this is actually a cutscene." I didn't realize that, so that was nice. But then it was kind of annoying also coming from a cutscene into gameplay because I didn't realize I could control my character, and the overall flow of it was just a little bit sporadic. Like it kind of jumped all over the place. But I don't know. That's just my thoughts. What about you, Olivia?
I think that I guess I wasn't really a huge fan of the mini games because I kept wondering like this seems to be interrupting the flow of this kind of cinematic quote unquote game. Especially parts of the lockpicking where I'm like, this is a cool device. I actually usually like lockpicking in games, but the stakes weren't really there. And I can understand like how frustrating that would be if you're like trying to pick a lock and then you get killed or something. But I just kept wondering like what is the player gaining? Like, what is the choice that we're making here? And I didn't really see anything that was super interesting in my opinion. And I also feel like especially in the hospital section, like in Bedlam or whatever, where it felt like there was like a series of cutscenes, like with the werewolf, where you have to kind of like just do a bunch of quick time events. And I kept wondering, like, this, like, you die and you reset it. And I think I got through it after once or twice, but I'm like, this seems like a poor decision when you're trying to, like, make this kind of, cinematic game. Like, okay, I know that you have limited resources and like a quick time event is a great way to kind of extend those resources, but I kept wondering, like, why? Like I think we all agree that quick time events maybe aren't the best use when they're used sequentially, like when you're doing a lot of them in a row.
Never.
Yeah.
I mean, never use QuickTime events. I'm against them.
I mean, I think unless the game is going to be open in the way that like Until Dawn is, like where the stakes are really high if you miss them, or the game somehow will change if you miss them, then just having QuickTime events you can repeatedly fail is just like that's just a loop of frustration, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I wondered like the game felt choppy to me. And Rebecca, I'm wondering, did you have that experience? How was your like experience playing the game and like seeing like the different sections?
Yeah, it definitely was very choppy to me. I think one of my issues is that you never really spent very long anywhere. And so I feel like on the one hand you have these like beautiful environments where, I don't think I saw reused assets to that point. You know what I mean? Like
Almost not.
the the United India Company house was like one specific thing, and the airship had its own color scheme, and there's were paintings on the walls and beautiful like sofas and shit everywhere. I loved it, and it was just like this really hit me in the very first part of the game, and like that was hard because I was really excited for the game to come out. But the sequence where you have to, in the very beginning, you have to climb down to the street, and then there's like people kind of walking around. Um, Very quickly, it became apparent how much of a corridor the game was.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you'd have these people walking around, and then they would like repeat their dialogue, um,
Yeah.
and there was no reflections. You couldn't look in windows. There were no doors to open. It was a weird juxtaposition for me because the game also asked you to find collectibles. There's
Yes.
Yeah.
newspapers, and then there's audio files, and then there's like objects that you can find. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like the flow was always difficult because it was like we want you to explore, but not too much, and we want you to do these mini games, but not too much, and then we want you to have a film game, but not too much because it's still a game, so we have to put some QTEs in there. You know what I mean? Like it just felt like it was kind of all over the place in terms of like what it wanted to do. Um, did you guys ever spend any time with the collectibles? Like, did you
Um,
find any of them? Did you look for
Here's
them?
my extent of the collectibles. I found a recording and it didn't fucking autoplay. And in order to listen to the recording,
Right.
I have to open up the menu, click on
Uh
the
huh.
thing, and then
Yeah.
stay on that page and listen to the entirety or just like read the fucking text. And then I'd go about my
Right.
day. That
Yes.
is severely poor game design, especially for a video game in 2015 when something like BioShock has come out ages ago, where they had the pick up a recorder and you can continue walking or exploring whatever you're doing while also listening to the recording itself. I did find like other collectibles. I didn't go out of my way. Like I at the very beginning, I would try to go out of my way to find things, but then at the very end, I was like, I don't give a fuck because like I'm not given the time of day for these things that I'm collecting, and it's not really adding any flavor to what I'm doing. It's not giving me really any insight onto, um, like the world that I'm in. I mean, so a
Mhm.
few did, but not to the extent of everything together. Most of it was
Yeah.
just, I'm going to tell you this nursery tale, a bedtime story or something like that. Or, it's weird, really. Or it'll sometimes give you like a little bit of a historical context. I think for like Henry III or something like that, and how he was a tyrant. I can't remember exactly what it was, but for the most part, though, it was just kind of like benign things that that didn't really, for me personally, didn't really do anything for the world or the game that I was playing, and the fact that it was like super inaccessible and annoying. I was like, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
give it time of day. So
It felt just like a lot of flavor, which usually I'm like into, but the way that it was presented was challenging, like Tyler said. I was wondering, Rebecca, did you collect did you collect a significant amount of the collectibles?
I did. I had always meant to go and do them all on a second playthrough, but I'm pretty sure I found all of the newspapers and I found all of the objects. I did not find all of the audio logs.
Okay. In what you collected, did it give you any kind of background into like the order and like its evolution from like Arthurian legend or like back in
N-
those times to what it became? Like, did it give you
Not
some kind of additional like understanding?
not really. It seemed like it was more of sort of flavor text to kind of give you an idea of what the world was like at the time. And so it kind of touched on, what was happening. So I think, I don't remember which of you mentioned it, but the newspaper about like Queen Victoria's absent kind of a thing. It would give you that kind of flavoring, but that was it, really. A lot of the audio logs to this point, I can't even remember what most of them even were about, but it was not, a lot of it was about the United Indie Company, I think, and like their motivations and globalness at the time. But yeah, it was tough. There was something about the order though, if I remember correctly. I think that they had tried to use that one that's a lullaby, which is the one that I still remember, because it was so lovely. But I think that they had changed the lyrics or something a little bit to um, kind of reference the order. Like the order was sort of vaguely known among the people as like the protectors of people.
Mm-hmm.
So you get kind of that storyline, but it again is like not easy to find those things. They're hidden away in the menu, which I assume was a design feature because if you walk 5 feet, you're in another cutscene. So it's sort of
Right.
like,
Right.
you can't
That's
listen to a
possible too,
5-minute thing.
which I can understand it, but also like,
But it's not good design if people can't just listen to them.
right.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to return to, just based on the aesthetics conversation you were having, was the idea of the, widescreen black bars on the, because I just didn't expect that as part of the game. And as I was playing, I was like, oh yeah, this was like a controversy at the time. And I assume they were put in there to give it a more like filmic quality and also to kind of save on like processing power, because that game seemed like it was a challenge. Did it bother either of you?
I kind of ignored them.
Yeah,
actually.
I would say maybe like at first it was, because I mean I love how, honestly, I love how when you start the game it totally like has that you're watching a movie feel to it, and then when you start the game it's a cutscene with Sir Galahad being tortured. I would say I didn't really notice it that much, honestly. I didn't feel like it's like hindered or reduced my experience. I don't know though. I mean I feel like there was another game that came out that also had bars, and it wasn't
Evil Within.
Probably, yeah.
It was, the Evil Within, because didn't they give you an option to turn them off?
I think after in the PC version there was a mod that removed them.
So it didn't. For me, it didn't like have a negative impact on my gameplay. So.
Okay. I think for me, I was just like really surprised that was how they used those, and I don't know. I just felt like it was like almost taking me out of the experience, because I was like, well, this isn't film. Like, are you showing a widescreen lens? Like, it just kind of felt like a more of a, hey, here's like some set dressing that we're gonna use to make this seem more like a film, instead of like
probably
actually having like an artistic impact on it. So that bothered me. I just wanted to make sure I had put that out there, because why are you putting black bars, dude? I want to use this full TV. I bought this TV. Put it on the full TV.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was playing it on my TV, which is like 75 inches. So it was just like, yeah. Anyway, yeah. Still a beautiful game, though.
So I feel like, in kind of winding down through our discussion of the order, obviously this game ended with the thought process that there was going to be more. And the devs have been very open about the fact that they would like to do another order game. I guess maybe the Order 1887. I don't know if that would be the logical conclusion. But that the fact that they know that Sony owns the IP, and so as long as Sony owns the IP and does nothing with it, then it's dead, pretty much. So knowing that the assumption was always there, and knowing that there is a desire, at least among the people who made this one, to kind of give it another go, would you, at this point in time, having played it, having kind of talked through it, would you want another Order game? Would you want a sequel? And if you do, what would you want it to address? Like, what would you want it to be that this game wasn't? Olivia, I'll start with you. See what your feels are like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to execution. And I feel like there are some really cool ideas in the Order. Like, I like the idea of using Arthurian legend to tell a story about, this time period with rapid industrialization, like colonization of, the world. I just would like to see more. Let's take a wider view about what they're trying to accomplish, and let's make their intentions really clear. This is the Order specifically. Like, okay, now that Galahad's left the Order, like, they're like an autocratic organization, it seems like, and they're kind of like imposing martial law. Like, what does that do to Galahad's perspective, and like, why are they doing that? Like,
sure,
that would be something that I'd love to see. And like, let's get out of, if we're gonna be in England the whole time, that would be, I would like that. It seemed like it was a really pretty area, but like, we're talking about going to the Americas, we're talking about going to India. Like, let's get a little more variation. I think that would be a really cool way to kind of invert your expectations about what the Order is. What do you think, Tyler?
I I really think that this game could be amazing and like a AAA title, successful game of the year, amazing. What I feel like the sequel needs to do is to ramp up the mysticism and throw in more werewolves and vampires and occult references and things. Because this game, the Order 1886, doesn't do that. Like, if they're there, they're present, but they're not in any way important, unfortunately. And I feel like this game would really be beneficial if it became, if they could somehow retain like their graphical intensity, that would be amazing. But I mean, I'm not gonna, if it's gonna be what I expect it to be next for the sequel, it has to be like an open world, or almost where like it's like a Dishonored, where it is not open world, but where you are set, the city you're set in, you're able to go do different things, and you can either follow the quest or like you can go off and do your side thing, whatever you want to do. And I feel like it would be that kind of a world. It'd be very beneficial doing that. If they want to keep it to, the same cinematic 3D movie, feel, that's fine, but they need to make something a little bit more open, more like the Uncharted series, where even if it's linear, it's still like, then they have to really dial up the story, and really dive into the lore of this universe, because we don't really know anything about it, unfortunately. So hopefully, if there is a sequel, it's like it's an open world, first person, whatever, and you get to discover more about the vampires and the werewolves, and like I don't know, and maybe throw in like a little bit of trait trees as well. I don't know. This is one guy just thinking here, but like I really feel like this game could be something amazing if Sony can give up their IP, or hand it back over to the original devs and have them give them time and the money to do something different with it, because it really does need a lot of polish, such as audio logs that you can listen to while walking.
Audio logs you can listen to while walking. The Order 2. That's all it needs, and it's totally fixed.
So
we fixed it.
What about you, Rebecca? What do you hope for the sequel?
I guess that if anything, I just hope that it would exist at some point in time. I'm glad we got to talk about this game, because it almost feels very cathartic for me, because I have been a big fan of this game for a long time, knowing that it's, deeply flawed, but I really believed in what it could have been, and I have kind of stood by my belief that it's definitely a flawed masterpiece. Like, there's just so much about it that's so good, and then so much that falls so short or so flat, that I really would like just to see that this story doesn't die, because I think it really could be great, like what you both have said. And I would hope that, if not the original team, that someone who loves it like I do and like they did, would be able to kind of take the reins and make it great. But I don't know, time will tell. It could be like 5 years down the road, we'll get the Order 1886 again, and it won't be at all related to the previous one, just like what they did to Prey. Yeah. Or it'll be like Wolfenstein 2, but it's really Wolfenstein 15. Or it'll be like God of War, but it's really God of War 5. You know what I mean? Like, who knows with Sony these days, right, what'll happen to it. But I just hope that the memory sort of lives on. So thanks for talking about this with me, and for going with me on this sort of adventure. I appreciate you traveling with us today. So next month, Tyler is doing Horizon Zero Dawn. We'll be visiting, I think it's Utah/Colorado.
It's the Four Corners. You got your Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico.
There we go. Post-apocalyptic yes. Four Corners America. I'm really excited for that.
Yes, it's going to be great.
So, my name is Rebecca. You can find me on Twitter at @RebeccaFaye. Tyler, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at WorldJumpin'. Drop the G.
And Olivia, where are you at online?
I'm on Twitter at LivJQ. Just hit me up there.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Until next month, this is Greetings From.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Greetings From. Our intro and outro song is an edited version of Deep Fried Space Food by Substitute Sandwiches. You can find a link to the song in the podcast description. You can listen to more episodes of Greetings From at greetingsfrom.zone. We are on Twitter and Twitch at greetingsfrompc. Please do follow us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.